Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see, today we've got two guests, which is awesome. They've co-authored a book, which we're going to talk about shortly. But Su Feng and also Hannes, how's your week been? Because we love to find out how our guests' weeks have been before we start with the questions.
So we've had a really busy but lovely week. And the key part of that was that essentially we started to send out the first copies of our book.
Amazing.
So yes, that one. Oh, you do it exactly the same. The same thing.
I'm so happy.
That's so cool.
And also to receive people's excitement. They would send us messages that they received the book and they're really excited. So it's really lovely.
Yeah, like just that friends that we wrote a special message for, that they've been such great support, and they just said thank you for making a difference in the world. You know, just like as simple as that, and that is so big.
That is gorgeous. So we'll talk a little bit about the book in a second, but we'd love to understand sort of your journey to where you are today. So feel free, both of you can share whichever works for you.
Well, this is a book that comes from ideas that we really want to do something that drawing on care, empathy, kindness as the theme, as the main theme, to really engage in a lot of conversation in leaderships and workplace experiences. So we just started to think about a model, and we can talk about the bento box. The idea is that, and I was busy making lunchbox for my children, and then that moment I was thinking about the interconnectedness of the lunchbox, of the bento box, have multiple components and a different segment, but come together as a big whole. And then we're thinking about how can we translate some of the social psychology framework in that's a social ecological framework, that's an interconnected interdependence, that how do we really make it make sense to a lot of people? And then we came up with this idea of the bento box models to promote care in workplace.
Yes, and I'll just step a step further back. Was a few experiences that we had, and we actually talk about it in the book, but we had many more. But one was an experience where we've got a family member that's receiving mental care in a facility, and the discussion that we had was just absolutely shocking. The CEO of the facility spoke to us, and it was just lack of empathy, total push to get money and to accelerate things in a way that wasn't going to help our family member. And so we were sitting back and going, but how does this work? How does, when we expect care especially from healthcare professionals, that it didn't come through? Then we had a different experience where we were doing something in Malaysia, and we were creating
an event.
We can probably say what it was. It was our wedding, actually. And so we were coordinating this.
Really important event.
Exactly. But it was just the most beautiful experience we had, from the frontline experience in terms of people just being positive, connected to us,
and
showing
you can feel heartfelt, like they are willing to do. There's no problem in terms of help, and they're genuinely happy and wanting to work. And it's nothing is the problem, nothing too hard. And it's not a staff member in the front line, but it's actually all the way to the senior leaders who will show up and then really care. And I was thinking, like, we have a lot of conversation about how our experience in different professional contexts and workplaces, that it actually gives people different energy and different sense of connection.
And then, you know, you'll see this one as well in the book, is that we don't put ourselves above any of this. So we also had an experience ourselves where we were actually in Perth, and we were in a hotel, a beautiful hotel, and we came out, and in the street there were two people in distress, and like their things were scattered, you know, across the pavement, and we essentially walked past it. Later that evening we said to each other, how is it that two people that really cares about people actually walked past that? You know, what in us allowed us to do that? And that is when we looked at those three things together, we sort of went, wait, there's something here that we would really love to understand better. So we love to understand how it works. What are the ingredients that helps people to, or enables people to care, or disables them from showing care? You know, so, and that is the front end to Su Feng's first, you know, to the bento box. You know, is that because that is how we came to care? Is that we just realized And then as we started talking to friends and family, we realized that they've had so many experiences themselves of
Very
both,
similar.
you know, that we would expect it, you don't see it. And then sometimes we don't expect it. Like I do a lot of work in the mining industry. And then sometimes you go underground, you know, so coal miners that works hard, you know, so they're in physically rough environments, you know, so, and you find the most caring people there. You know, so where sometimes people would expect it may not exist, you know, so there may be an outside perception that it doesn't exist, but it does, you know, so it exists quite deeply, you know, so and that is, it's those experiences that made us go, we really want to understand the power of care, you know, and how it interconnects. And then the thing for us was that two realizations. Care is really deeply interconnected depending on the dimension of care you look at. But it's also really, really complex. And that is where Su Fang's, you know, so she was so excited when she called me in the morning when she was looking at the bento box, and she was thinking, I think I found a way to simplify this, how we can put it together.
I love the curiosity to go down this, because obviously the world at the moment, things like care, kindness are super, super important, particularly although you were talking about empathy. Tell us a little bit more, and I'd love for you to hold up your book, about the power of care, and maybe just one really story that you love that really shows either where we don't do care or the impact of care, whichever one you think would be better for our listeners and viewers.
You do that.
Oh, that's pressure.
I have to hold it higher.
So this is the book, right? And the story I'll relate to comes or links into the chapter of the culture of care. And the culture of care is terminology that I started quite a few years ago in the company I worked at when we were looking at our 5-year plan process and our 2-year plan process. And, you know, being mining engineers and scientists and all sorts of very structured thinkers, we focused a lot on what are the sort of systems things that we can do. You know?
Many of them have like engineering background, and not many of them are thinking about the emotion.
People side of it. So I was looking at the initiatives on the list and I was going, but there's nothing about our culture. What is the culture we want to create? You know, so in our business, what do we want that to feel like? And this was back in 2008. And the best words I could come up, even back then, it was way before me and Su Fang had this, you know, so real deep dive into care, was culture of care. We really want to create a culture that shows care and where people feel cared for, and where people care for people and things, you know, so that's what we want to create. And I had the most beautiful experience, the story that leads into that section. I came out of the chemical industry into the mining and metals industry. And my friends in the chemical industry at the time and colleagues just warned me. They said, don't go there. This is a tough industry. You won't last 6 months. People don't care. It's all about performance, you know, and if you don't do it within the first few months,
I have the same impression too. When I met Hannes, I was thinking that, you work in that industry, it is a tough industry, and actually I have a preconception that people working in that industries are not connecting with people, they are unkind to everything, environment, to human, to animal, everything. That was my preconception.
Thank you. And so what happened was, in the first few months, I think I was about a month into this, when at the time we had a group manager, HR, and she came to me and she said, we want to have a strategic session, but we also want to have a bit of fun. You know, so, and being South African, of course, fun normally meant either a barbie or a braai, as we call it, you know, or some wine or drink, or both, preferably. She said, at the time, I did not consume alcohol. And she said, Hannes, I know that you don't consume alcohol or don't drink, but we actually want to get some wine farmers, you know, so to come and talk to the team and just talk about the experiences. These wine farmers were all ex-rugby players. You know, so there's this connection back to something that's important in the culture, rugby, but also wine. And she said, do you mind? Because if you mind, we won't do it. You know, and I was really, really touched by it. And I said to her, honestly, so you asking me this? I said, really, I really feel so cared for and included, you know, so and I said, no, I don't mind at all, you know, just as long as you don't expect me to drink alcohol, I'm fine with it. Then the evening of that event actually arrived, so we did the session, the evening they all pitched up. When they had tasting glasses, you know, like they normally do, but they had it on trays, so they would go around and offer people white and red wine. Then they came to me and they go, here, this is yours. And what they did is they actually put red grape juice and white grape juice in my class. So and that was really just that level of detail of care to be inclusive of a team member that's different. So and I was just and I didn't know they were going to do that. So that was a total surprise to me. So and then I went, gosh, for a crowd that's not supposed to be caring, they actually show a lot of inclusivity and care. And then later that night it even stepped up a level, and that is these wine farmers started to, probably a few of them had a bit too much of their own wine. So one of them came to me and he said, so don't you want to try some real wine? So like real wine, because he obviously knew. And my boss was sort of like, at the time, he just disappeared appeared like out of nowhere. And he just took him around and he put his arm around his shoulder and he walked off with him. Like literally just walked him away from me. Yeah, so, and I just went, wow, so this is the culture that I'm stepping into, as a leader. And it just showed so much care. So to that level of where somebody that's got different needs were included in a way where it wasn't highlighted, it wasn't, you different, but they knew it was different. And I knew it was different. And
you feel that, you feel the care, and then that make you wanting to work and give your knowledge more to the workplace.
Absolutely. And there's a good and a bad that comes with that, right? Because the thing is that the connection then with the company is so strong, you want to give everything. And I did, so I really gave everything I had, so because I felt cared for, so and I want to show care myself. But then the unintended consequence of that was that I overbalanced in one of the dimensions of the bento box too much for a long time. So, and then self-care actually for me started to take a bit of a knock because I overbalanced in that dimension, not because I was forced, but because I was so passionate about it and the people I worked with.
I love that concept of balance too, to get that right. What a great story too, and how inclusive they were and made you feel safe. That's beautiful. So let's go to our next question, which is, and I see this a lot because I do a lot of executive coaching, that sometimes a leader's ego will come out, and when it comes out, it tends to create a bit or a lot of chaos, depending on how strongly it comes out. So can you sort of explain why that chaos or that havoc can happen when the leader's ego comes out?
To us, we actually have a section, chapters on soul care. This is this topic is actually really important. It is because, to us, we see egos. It is as important to recognize as recognizing soul. And because I think that to come up with authentic self, with leaders, we often encourage all of us to show up as our soul. But our self actually came with a multiple dimension. We not just authentic self means everyone love the authenticness of ourselves. We might have some flaws and we're not perfect, and we may have some limitations or underlying beliefs that telling us and maybe negative thought that we're not good enough. So egos is a really interesting thing that to us this is the other side of the soul, where when leaders is coming and feeling insecure with their role or lacking of confidence in the role and the amount of work and pressures that they handle, especially under prolonged stress, and then easily just fall into that ego will come out just to defend and protect themselves, so that having more control or taking more and making more rules, and then use a bit more force to get everyone in line so that I can see efficiency, I can see productivity, I can see performance. Egos comes out when there was issue of insecurity deep down and of the leaders. So when we actually write this book, we actually really wanted to engage in this topic of ego in a quite empathetic way, because if we engage with leaders who struggle emotionally, under prolonged pressure, experience loneliness. Being leaders can be really lonely. You can't share a lot of things with your team or even in the front line because you're highly scrutinized in everything you do. So egos actually came up often, especially leaders may experience. To us, we're actually looking all the way back to trauma, and then growing up, experience of trauma is not necessarily the experience of direct abuse or violence. It could be everyday experience of not being pay attention to, experience of neglects and rejections. It's a child in a family, at school environment, in a community, for being themselves as being criticized. And then so ego is actually built in unconsciously. So we have a chapter on soul care, really engage leaders who struggle emotionally and they're still working through their own shadow, their own little, the deep shadow that constantly being pushed down further and further in order to show up strong, in order to show up competent and perfect and excellent. And that pressure of leadership has been traditionally been accepted and embraced by our world. That is a good leadership, but they themselves deep down is struggling within. So in today's world where we have a lot of calling out leaders, toxic behavior, they actually, lost it at workplace, and then they are under a lot of pressure, but they're not lead according to what we expect a leader to lead in the way that we want. And then this calling out of the leadership bad behavior, again, we generalize bad behavior as in an empathetic way at the moment, but there are actually multiple degrees of the bad behavior. So when leaders are struggling emotionally and not having time and space, a support that is caring, and then the bad behavior will be escalated, and then often to a point of it's hurting and harming the leaders themselves as well as the team. The cancel culture is one of that, that people say, go on social media, just like really, talk about how I was being treated unfairly by my supervisors or boss. Is actually egoistic and, all of that. So to us, I think that there's a lot of a solution in the workplace is using legal approach and framework to deal with behavior issue in the workplace. But we really wanted to create an alternative models that is a soul-driven, empathetic, compassionate approach to really support and help leaders who care but struggle emotionally during the time that they actually given a very important role to lead a whole organization and a team.
I think
I
that's
love that. So that sort of goes to the next question anyway, in terms of how then do we support those leaders who are struggling emotionally to be able to be a better version of themselves?
It's a beautiful question, so because ideally what one wants to build on, and I'll go back to the same model where Su Fang was just a few seconds ago. The core ingredient for us there is how do we help them to become more conscious? Or in the first place, how do we help them become more self-aware? So because it starts with self-awareness, and then consciousness. So for us, the way we think about it at least is that awareness is sort of the first step, and then consciousness is really that deeper understanding of why something is there, So from a leadership perspective, the person may come across as frustrated when they engage, and they may become aware of the fact that they are frustrated, but they may not know why. That is where consciousness then comes in terms of, okay, why am I frustrated? And now you go deeper into the things that Su Fang just spoke about, so because that frustration may be driven by underlying belief, it may be driven by trauma, it may be driven by social programming, and all of that sits within the leader, so, and Su Fang describes it quite beautifully, we often talk about the ego as the guard dog of the person, so I don't see the ego as necessarily negative. I think it's designed, it's got a purpose for us, but to me, I see the ego sort of like the guard dog of the house, so it is present, it is there to protect, and it will respond when it senses a threat, so to the person. The problem though is when the guard dog becomes the owner of the house, then the owner sits outside and the guard dog, is essentially,
Yeah,
doing
exactly.
all the things that the owner should be doing in the house, so there's a place for the ego that's quite
Yep.
beautiful, and it is there, but it is not, should not be the owner of the house, so then the question, then to answer your question, I know there's a long way to get there, is what can we do to help leaders become more aware and more conscious? So, and I'm really privileged in the sort of work that I do, and Sufang as well in what she does, where a lot of our work is coaching. And sometimes, in my case, because I've spent many years in two large industries, also mentoring. And it is really about my experience with most leaders that I've worked with in my life is that they honestly like to improve themselves. So they may just be totally unaware of their shadow. The first step is to make them aware of there's something in your shadow that keeps on popping out. And the way to do that is to ask them questions about that. Is that, have you noticed, and this is just an example, have you noticed that when you talk to this person, your voice tone changes and you actually don't look them in the eyes? So what do you think sits behind that? And that is, and you may not even be aware that you do. So until you listen to the question, you go, oh, that's actually a really good question.
Yeah.
Well, there is actually something between me and this person that we need to work on. And that is that first level of raising awareness, and then from awareness going into consciousness, into what actually sits behind that, and then working on that. You want to say something? I can sense that.
No, I just wanted to add on to the guard dogs analogy that when the dogs take over the home and then the owners sit outside. Take us back to that story. That is beautiful, beautiful. So I don't want to interrupt you. It's because it's so important that, because one reaction that we do is to shout at the guard dog, go out, sit out, this is my home, you are out, I don't like you, go away. And then, but that's just not going to help the ego. The ego, we need to really engage with the ego by acknowledging that I see you, I notice you. And then because they actually have issue too. And then, but in fact, basically just allow this ego to really settle down the nerve. And then I said, okay, and you can sit here, and then now I need to really respond in a very different way. So the level of awareness and consciousness is the way that Hannes is asking the client questions about, do you notice something that you may not aware of, like this, some of the deep unconscious, subconscious behavior that we don't notice it ourselves unless someone bring it out to us, and that requires so much a deep level of trust, right? And then so if this is a leadership coach or in a connection that is not there, trust is not there, talking to a person that do you notice that the way your tones have changed when you're talking to another person, and then they came across as the guard dog would come in, jump in and just say that really defensive that you actually say things like that to me. I'm the boss of the company. Right. But again, really engaging in that guard dog conversation, really raising the level of consciousness, empathy, compassion, that I see you. You have a role to play, but at the moment we need to really work on it in a different way. Again, come back to the care, the power of care can totally transform leadership. And then leaders who act out often may have some deeper and deeply suppressed and unresolved issues, and that need a bit of care to work with.
And that's why I love what Sufang has just said, instead of just wildly going, let's cancel them, understand that they are human,
we're not perfect.
They are human, all of us are human, they've got shadows that they're working on at the same time. And the thing is that if you look at those roles, and now I'm talking about CEOs of organizations or COOs of organizations, they carry a lot of pressure, so those roles, I've worked with a lot of CEOs in my life, and I still do. They are always put in place to transform an organization. I have not seen one CEO put in place to say, okay, just keep on running this exactly as it is, it's perfect. Don't know, maybe there's roles like that out there, I haven't seen them yet.
No.
So they always come in with an agenda and a mandate from the board to transform a business. And with that comes a lot of pressure on themselves, and then they sit in the middle between the board on the one side owning the strategy, and then their own management team and management responsibility and the workforce, and they need to deliver. They're the single point of accountability between them. And what that means then in reality is that often when the pressure comes on, the shadow jumps out. And when the shadow jumps out, that is the opportunity then to look at the shadow and go, okay, let's understand why the shadow is here. Because the shadow is part of us. So that's why that part of the book is actually so beautiful for us, because it brings this into the leadership discussion in terms of understanding that leaders have shadows, and some of them are aware of it and some of them are not aware of it. Most of them, the concept of shadow is that you're not aware of it.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's unconscious.
Yeah. So then that brings me to the next one question, which is, what are the ways we can understand as a leader our shadows? So how do we actually bring them from potentially subconscious to conscious?
That's a beautiful question.
I'm happy to give it a go. And to us it is require slowing down a little bit rather than keep rushing to really meeting deadline with the task and all. So leaders who actually have a lot of pressure and have this unconscious, unaware shadow that is keep popping up when this is the most inconvenient time. That is, it means that the leaders actually need to slow down, to pause, to create and hold space. Can be just 5-10 minutes a day, just really tune within and start from within to really checking in, how am I feeling? Am I okay? And because the shadow also playing out because of usually it's a deep-seated and unresolved emotion. It could be, like irritation or frustration, so you mentioned earlier. That is often is actually lead to the leaders, to drive the leaders to keep going in a particular direction, that it is not aligned with the deeper being and a higher being. So how to us that, in what way that we can encourage the leaders to raise that awareness to us? I think that they have the intention and want to work with the unconscious, and that it has to be the first point, because many leaders, they actually choose to work harder. It's a choice, and because they don't want to work within, because it's actually really painful, very difficult, very uncomfortable. So they just choose the other option that is actually work harder, 12 hours, 14 hours a day, so I don't have time to work on myself. I'm perfect all the time, I'm strong all the time, because this is vulnerable. And so we need to actually do the opposite, just like, fear, and the opposite of fear is love and kindness. Right, and the opposite of busyness is actually time, free time. So it's actually really correct and half safe to say that, okay, I'm going to try something different this time, rather than just bombard myself with things to numb. But I want to experience, I want to feel, I want to be alive, and I want to feel uncomfortable, and just to address the shadows so that I can truly thrive again.
I think it's beautiful. The other things that comes to mind for me, so if we go back to the bento box, the model of the bento box, is that there's 4 dimensions in the bento box. And often these leaders are very heavily investment in the culture of care part, and that is how they lead their organizations. So another way of them to become more self-aware is to be more balanced across the other dimensions of the bento box. So if you look at, for example, in essentially...
You keep talking, I'll just go...
In essentially, relational care, you can actually show that.
Yeah, exactly, I'm going to show you.
In the relational care, so when we talk about that, it is to surround yourself and to keep connection with, so trusted colleagues that have been through this already. Colleagues that don't necessarily stroke your ego, but give you honest feedback of what they see about you. So I had this beautiful experience actually a few months ago where
It's like just you can see that is really the model. I hope that this is not the other way around. You can see it in the right way.
It's
so
the
we
right
have
way.
that's good. A self-care, relational care, a cultural care, and soul care. And that is the model that we put in this book.
Absolutely. And the thing is that, when you get to, if you ask once again, how can a leader become more self-aware? It is by having equilibrium across the other dimensions of care will help
the
with
balance.
that. So healthy relationships, whether it's with the person's partner, having friends in their life, having colleagues in their life that are trusted, those people will all help them, so to become more self-aware, so, and I've had this beautiful experience a few months ago where I went back to do some work for a company that I did, and the executive assistant was still exactly the same person. And she said to me, I also knew the CEO very well from a previous life, but both she and me worked for the same supervisor or boss at the, from about 20 years ago. And she said to me, do you know what he called you behind your back? And I said, no, I've got no idea. She said, he called you, Hannes is my conscience. So, and that's the point I want to make, right? Is that to surround you as a leader, yourself with people that can be your conscience and are willing to speak up for you when you miss things. And I knew I played that role for this leader because I was willing to challenge, him, so positively whenever I saw anything, so, and he never told me that's how he viewed me, but she knew what he called me behind my back. But what I wanted to say is that part of that is just balancing or bringing equilibrium to the other parts, so of the bento box. And the other thing that Su Fang touched on there is when you go to the awareness bit, so the self-care bit, it is for them to ask, why does my body respond in a certain way? So now I'm talking about my physical body, so for me, for example, so when I'm under a lot of stress, I become ill. So my immune system, has taken a knock, and from stress, essentially. And so I know the moment I start to become ill that there's something going on that I need to address. For Su Fang, it's her shoulder, so she...
Normally it's my right shoulder is always play out, and that's the most reliable conscious things to tell me that I'm actually really need to take a break. Quite reliable. So I think that to us that when we include the ingredient of awareness, is about aware, connect with our body, aware to the pain, and they're actually quite reliable. A lot of people, including myself for a long time, we rely on our brain, our rational mind telling, I can still work harder, I can push further. And then, but my body was telling me, and then I would ignore that messages. It's just not just a shoulder thing. And then, so what awareness is actually really important for us is we put it in our Power of Care book, is that we need to reconnect with our body to have a greater awareness of whether we are looking after ourselves, which self-care, so that we can look after other people, we can look after the organization, puts ourselves first. Just the oxygen mask and analogy, when on an aeroplane we put the oxygen mask on ourselves before the children, and so. And again, often the leaders will struggle, including ourselves, to really put ourselves first. When we kind of a service leadership kind of a mentality that we need to make sure everyone is okay and put ourselves last. So that is having that balance of self-care, relational care, and creating a cultural care in workplace. We regard the word equilibriums in a way that is different from balance, because balance is often, like work-life balance, or our body and mind balance, but equilibrium allow us to go across different dimensions, balance in a different ways. So it's just like the social ecology that we are in, and then the balance is in a multiple dimension. And so the power of care is actually complex. So it can't translate in the mental box model that is interdependence. And that's how.
Love it. And I'm just conscious of time, so I reckon we're just going to get you back to have a deeper conversation if that works for the two of you.
Of course it does.
Let's sort of go to the last question for the moment. Two questions. So the first one is, we love to understand how you go about writing books, and we've never had two co-authors together. So what was your process of writing together or separate, however you did it?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I actually really enjoy writing and co-authoring. I have authored many single books, and then I just feel collaborating and writing the book together, it's actually enhanced so much of the brain and the conceptual framework in a many different ways. So we really enjoy co-authoring together. So I would normally start drafting, and then Hannes is actually more of a model person. We actually have a big screens in our room. We actually will start drawing and playing with the model, tweaking. So that's actually is a process of collaborations in a many different way. And my writing, as much as I love writing, is often have a lot of grammatical errors with missing s's, plurals, and singles.
Too many s's.
Too many, or no s's in the places that I should be. And it's actually so helpful to have another person that just really help, just again, like working together to check on our own unconscious, unaware mistakes as well. So it's really good.
Yeah.
It's
And
beautiful.
from our perspective, I think that we've got a beautiful connection in our relationship, emotional connection.
And by the
as
way,
well as
we are also husband and wife. So
You get that one.
So for us, it's a beautiful emotional connection, but also a beautiful intellectual connection. And that really helps us, and it gives us the desire, to make a change, so, and to discuss things and bring it through a different lens. Also in the writing of the book, the chapters on self-care and relational care was fundamentally Sufang. That's an area of knowledge, passion, so, and I probably brought in a little bit more in on the culture of care and the soul care part, because of my experience, so in leadership and also in charity work. So that is sort of how but then, so we would frame it and then we just, model it, talk about it, and then ask, how can we bring this into simple language? Because one of the beautiful challenges that Sufang's sister May gave her very early on was, she said, you're an academic, you sound too academic when you talk about things. You need to bring things in very simple language to people. And that's actually what inspired the thinking around the bento box to a large degree, was that challenge by May, to say you really need to think
communicate
about how you
in a way that connect with people.
I love that. What a beautiful story. So let's just go to our last question, because we can guarantee we've got some listeners or viewers who would love to reach out to the two of you, learn a little bit more about your book, if you want to hold that up again, and just sort of where could they connect with you? So feel free to share social media, etc. Where can they reach out to you?
So they can reach us on LinkedIn. So we are both on LinkedIn. Bento Box of Care is on LinkedIn as well. Or they could just go to bentoboxofcare.com. So all in one word, no spaces, and essentially just connect with what we do there. So, and those are probably the two main ways to get into contact with us.
Can I say thank you both so much for joining us? We will definitely get you back, because there's questions I didn't get to ask that I'm really interested in. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us each week. We really appreciate it. And for everyone, wish you a magical week.